Today's lesson is going to talk about angles. So we're going to do a lot of stuff with angles this year. So we kind of need to get all the terminology and the rules of them down pat. So let's start by defining an angle. An angle is the union of two rays that share an endpoint. Now what I mean by that is if you look in the picture here, we have ray BC. We also have ray BX. So you can see that both of these rays share B as their endpoint. So by definition, these rays form an angle. That endpoint that they share, that is called the vertex. So another way to think of the vertex is the point of an angle. So the very tip of it is called the vertex. Now there are 4 ways to name an angle. The first way is to use the number that's inside. So for example, we see a 1 in between these 2 rays. So we could call this angle 1. The other way is we can use 3 letters. You have to use a point on each ray, so a letter on each ray, and the end point that they share, or the vertex, that has to be the middle. So order does matter somewhat. So we could call this ray CBX. Again, the important part is that the B is in the middle. You could also do it in reverse order. You could call this XBC. And then the last way to name an angle, but this is one that we have to be careful about because you can't always do this, is to name it just by using the vertex only. So we could technically call this angle B. So I'm going to write, excuse my drawing, I'm doing the best I can with the mouse here. So we could call this angle B. Now here's why we have to be careful about that. Let's say I give you a different picture. So now there's lots of angles in this picture. Our first angle has B as the vertex. Our second angle also has B as the vertex. We have another angle with B as a vertex. And we have this giant angle with B as the vertex. So if you call one of these angle B, I won't know which one you're talking about because there's lots of angles who have B as the vertex. So we try to avoid using the vertex unless there is only one angle in the picture. Then you're okay. So as a good rule of thumb, I recommend you always go with the numbers inside or 3 letters. There are 4 types of angles, and you probably have heard these terms before. The first is a right angle, and that means an angle whose measure is 90 degrees. Now in geometry, we don't usually write 90 degrees. We just draw this little box. So if you see a box, they want you to know that means 90 degrees. So you can go ahead and make that conclusion. Now when we talk about angle measure, it means like how far did you fold it upwards in terms of a circle. So a full revolution would be 360 degrees. So for this picture, we folded it a quarter of a circle, which is 90 degrees. Then you have your obtuse angles. That's an example of what obtuse looks like. So we have angle X, Y, Z, or Z, Y, X. And obtuse means more than 90 degrees, but less than 180 degrees. So if we were to open this and fan it out, we would pass the 90-degree mark, but we wouldn't go the whole way to make 180 degrees. Then we have our acute angles, and those are angles that are less than 90 degrees, but more than 0 degrees. So we would still open up or fan out our ray, but it wouldn't go up to 90 degrees. It would stop before that. So most kids have learned these 3 angles before they take high school geometry. So some of us just needed a refresher. The 4th angle that you probably didn't realize was an angle is called a straight angle. A straight angle is exactly 180 degrees. So if you take your ray and you fold it all the way across, that's 180 degrees. And obviously, if it's 180 degrees, that means it's a line. So lines actually are angles as well. They're 180-degree angles, so we just call them straight angles. All right, then we have the word congruent again. So we had used that word in the past to talk about congruent segments. Now we're going to talk about congruent angles. Congruent angles are angles that have the same measure. So this angle's 30 degrees and this angle's 30 degrees, then those angles are congruent. But we're not going to write the word congruent all the time. We learned a symbol for that. So remember, it was the equal sign with a little tilde above it. And then we use a little angle symbol, and ABC is how we would name this first angle. And angle DFE is how we named the second angle. So this statement is pronounced angle ABC is congruent to angle EFD. Now, just like with segments, we had some rules regarding the congruency symbol and an equal sign. We also have rules for angles. So there's two ways that you can tell me that angles are equal. The first is what we wrote originally. Angle ABC is congruent to angle DFE. So that's one way you can tell me, hey, these are the same. The other way is you can use these little M's in front of your angle markings. And we don't use the congruency symbol, we use the equal symbol. The little M stands for the word measure. So this is pronounced the measure of angle ABC equals the measure of angle DFE. So you can choose either option to relay to me that these angles are the same measure. They're both the same size. But what we want to be careful is we don't get them mixed up. So if you're using the congruency symbol, you don't use the M's. If you're using the equal symbol, then you do use the M's. So we want to try not to mix those up. So honestly, if I was you, I would just pick one and stick with it. I wouldn't bother trying to go back and forth between them. And just like when we were doing our segments, we use these little tick marks to show equal. In angles, we use these things called arcs. So these little guys right in here, we call these arcs. So just like tick marks on a segment, those arcs mean same measure. So because we have matching arcs at angle O and angle E, that's telling us that those two angles are congruent. So that's another way that they could communicate congruency to you by using those little arc markings. So I just want to make sure that that makes sense. So we're going to just name 3 pairs of congruent angles based on the picture. So if you look at angle 2 and angle 4, you can see they each have one arc inside them. That means that they go together. The same thing with angle 1 and 5. You can see there's 3 marks in angle 1 and 3 in angle 5. And then angles 3 and 6 each have 2 arcs. So those are also congruent. So the number of arcs in an angle, that's how you know who's its match. So this is where I'm going to stop this video. You can go ahead and close this out, and then my next video we'll go ahead and continue on the notes, and we'll start with vertical angles.